Hello. Welcome to a special episode of Bitches Love Sports. It's been a minute. I'm your host, Jazz Monet, and it is way past my bedtime. Um, so I can't tell what platform people are watching on. All I'm gonna say is, oh, it's Eastside Harold. How are you? Hi, Kelvin. Hi, Harold. How are y'all? Oh man, this is so long overdue. If any of y'all follow me on Twitter, y'all might have seen me chatting back and forth with the Psych Effect podcast about falling asleep when I plan to go live. And that is like a true story. And it might sound crazy, but here's the thing. And I've talked about the fact that I'm a personal trainer before, but here's how that affects your life this time of year. This is a time of year that a lot of people who start off their New Year's resolution to like get fit and work on their nutrition, they start to kind of like waver a little bit, whether it's the weather change, lifestyle changes, or just unanticipated life changes, whatever. You have people who are all of a sudden like, well, I know I wanted to lose 50 pounds, but I lost 30 and I feel good. And so I'm going to quit. Or, yeah, I can't afford this as easily as I thought I could, right? So, for example, in the case of people who maybe can't afford a package that they signed up for, I might take them off of a prime time spot, which is like before and after work. People really love to work out before and after work. And I might be like, well, if you can meet me on XYZ weekday in the middle of the day, which is a harder spot to fill, I'll give you a discount. Changes your schedule a little bit. Then there are some people who outright cancel. I had to like change some classes. And when people cancel, when revenue changes, and I've talked about this before, I'll do Uber to make it up. I live by myself in Austin, not a cheap city. So yeah, I got to do what I got to do, right? And so what that leads to is like a really jacked up sleep schedule. And so you end up at a point where it's like you're not getting sleep. Or like for me, it's just been like adjusting to what the schedule is going to be like. My schedule's going to change again in April. Hopefully, it doesn't lead to another super huge hiatus. But yeah, that's why I've been absent for a couple weeks because I've literally been tired. I've literally been tired. Hey Clement, how's it going? Good to see you guys. Thanks, thanks so much for showing up. It's so exciting that like I basically scheduled this impromptu and y'all are all here. Um, so yeah, in the thumbnail, I highlighted one of the major topics of the night. We're not going to start off with that, but it's one of those things. And what I'm talking about is Dak Prescott's extortion lawsuit. It's one of those things that kind of hit the fan base a couple of weeks ago. And I know a lot of people have kind of spoken their piece on it, but a couple of things. One, I haven't, and I definitely feel the need to. And two, based on what I heard from various people in the fan base, whether they were other content creators or certain media outlets or a certain radio station that shall not be named, I just felt like there were certain details that were missed and that there was a different approach that could be taken whenever we discuss this particular topic. And before we even get into it, I'm going to be honest with y'all. It's been a tough topic for me because I am a huge Dak Prescott fan, as y'all know. I'm also a woman, as y'all know. And so it's been really tough. Like as I read the details of the case, I find my own biases going back and forth. Bias toward Dak Prescott, bias towards, hearing the woman's side of the story. And for a while I was like, I'm gonna just stay away from it because I felt like I had to, if I was going to approach this topic with you guys, I had to be able to do it from a strictly fact-based point of view and not allow the human element to come into it at all. But then I kind of thought about it and I was like, you know what? What if I take the opposite approach and just lead with the fact that, like, yes, I am a human being. We are all human beings. Topics like this will stir up feelings, stir up thoughts, whether it's because we're sensitive to topics of sexual assault or because we feel a certain way about, our favorite football players, or if we feel a certain way about high profile Black men being accused of such things. There are so many things about this whole situation that can bring up a lot of thoughts and feelings. And I think this is a good platform to really explore those things. So when we get into that topic, if y'all do have any questions, if y'all do have any comments, feel free to throw them into the chat box. Like I always say, if you're on Twitter and you want to make sure that your comment gets read, come over and join us on YouTube. That way I can make sure that I see your comment, because sometimes me seeing stuff from Twitter is hit or miss. By the way, I had to take down my whole setup and then put it back. So if the picture gets weird or if the audio is not loud enough or anything like that, let me know. I don't have a producer to like check my levels or anything, so I kind of had to put things back based on memory. So like if you're like, hey, I need you to be louder, just tell me in the chat box. But yeah, going back to what I was saying, yeah, when it comes to the topic of Dak Prescott, whatever, oh, Clement has a lot to say. But whenever we get to that topic, feel free to speak your piece. And based on the facts that I've been able to uncover, I will do my best to help everybody kind of unpack our thoughts and feelings on this topic. But before we get into that, as usual, we have our shout outs and call outs. So my first set of shout outs and call outs is I'm actually going to start on the college level with men's and women's March Madness. Just a general shout out to everybody who's made it to the Sweet 16 so far. Both tournaments have really been a joy to watch. What's been interesting about the men's tournament is going into March Madness, right? A lot of people were like, oh, like, you know, the women's tournament is getting more buzz. Everybody's talking about Caitlin Clark. There are more stars on the women's side. Nobody knows the names of the guys. You know, they don't have as many stars, so on and so forth. And very quickly, there are some people who, you know, made themselves known. And one of the most interesting things is this whole conversation around the age of players. So one of the things that's been happening is, hold on, let me pull this up. I was trying to pull up the bracket real quick. Fun fact, right before I went live, the window that I had with everything open kind of shut down. So I had to open everything back up. What was the name of that one school? Oh, Oakland. I just want to make sure that I get their opponents correct and the names of some of their players. I might not be able to pull up the names of their players. Dang it, this guy's name is not coming up. I just said these players made names for themselves, and now I can't find this guy's name. But anyway, Oakland University, who's out of Michigan, not Oakland, California, they started off the tournament by upsetting Kentucky. So Kentucky was the number 3 seed and Oakland was the number 14 seed, right? And then when that game happened, I think the first reaction was like, well, you know, Kentucky has this issue because, you know, they're one and done and all they do is focus on getting players to the NBA, and they're not actually focused on creating a quality college program. But then it came out that this one particular guy who, last name Golke, his first name is not coming up. And it's crazy because like the first week of the tournament, like his name was everywhere. That just shows you how quickly things can turn around. But yeah, the one particular guy who ended up scoring like 10 3-pointers in the game that basically gave Oakland the lead above everybody, they were like, oh, he's like 23, 24 years old. And so then started looking into the ages of the players of the teams that have given Kentucky trouble in the past, and they started noticing like, yeah, Kentucky's teams tend to be really young, and the teams that do better against them tend to have players that have been playing for a little bit longer, even if they're not as high profile. They're just older players. And so now there's this whole conversation surrounding, you know, the impact of one and done on college basketball, especially on the men's side, and what can actually be gained from players staying in college a little bit longer. And I think it's really interesting that all this is coming out around the same time that the NBA is like, all right, we're going to get rid of G League Ignite, which is a particular component of their G League program that was kind of designed to take younger players and develop them. And it's one of the G League teams that's not affiliated with one of the NBA teams. And they're like, we're going to get rid of this team. And part of the reason that they're doing that is because of the same thing. The players that they were bringing in were very young, and the development wasn't really going in the way that they expected it to. And so A lot of people were wondering what impact would be on Kentucky, if that would mean some shakeups in terms of the coaching staff. But I honestly think that the explanation that was given about, like, okay, now we're actually going to look at our recruiting and see if it might do us some good to bring in some older players. I think that might save a few people their jobs, honestly, because like before that happened, nobody went into the tournament thinking, yeah, Kentucky's a number 3 seed, but they actually might lose to Oakland because, they got that 24-year-old on their team. Like, nobody was saying that. But then after the game happened and after they saw the impact of a team that was more cohesive and players that had more experience, then they were like, oh, this age thing, there might be something to it. So yeah, the men's side gets shout outs for multiple reasons. Shout out to everybody 100% who made the Sweet 16, but also this whole conversation around development and the age of players is something that's needed to happen for a long time. And I might do a separate episode on this. I don't want to get too much into it right now, but like for a long time, we've seen the quality of players going to the NBA from college. They just haven't really been up to par. Like you have a few people who go in and they're ready, and that's really few and far between. But a lot of these guys who are doing the whole one and done thing or getting to the NBA, and they'd spend like one season with an NBA team, maybe. Like they come in expecting to be a starter, and then either before the end of the season or the next season, they'd end up on a G League team. And they were just finding out, like, hey, these guys are making a splash in college, but they get to the NBA and they're just not having the same impact. So, shout out to all the men's teams who are participating in the NCAA tournament. Now, on the women's side, huge shout out to the teams that are still remaining on the women's side of the NCAA tournament. And that's also for a lot of reasons, but for a lot of very different reasons. So, if you pay attention to me on Twitter, I retweeted some of the numbers in terms of ratings for the games that have happened so far on both the men's and women's side. And for the first time ever, the women, some of the games are actually beating a lot of the men's games. And I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but I do believe that Iowa's last game that was broadcast actually was the highest rated game so far for the tournament on either side, men's or women's. Now, a lot of this has to do with Caitlin Clark, and it's not like she generates this buzz by herself, right? If you go on any sports station, when it comes to college basketball, it's like these people cannot stop talking about Caitlin Clark. So there's a lot of promotion on that side, and they don't call it promotion, they call it coverage. But it's like when you cover one player and then you don't cover men's basketball at all, like, yeah, that's promotion technically. But it's well-deserved promotion, honestly. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on the women's side, especially in terms of the number of stars they have and in terms of the competitiveness of the games. It hasn't been as many upsets, but we have seen a lot of these teams come really close. Iowa, for example, who some people are picking as a favorite, I think mainly because of Caitlin Clark, because honestly, on paper, when you look at the teams holistically, South Carolina should 100% be everybody's favorite by a long shot, right? But there are a lot of people who want to see Iowa win. They want to see Caitlin Clark's story in that way, right? But in their game against West Virginia really gave them a run for their money, and I think that's good for women's college basketball in general because those people who don't get recruited to UCLA or South Carolina or LSU or UConn or Iowa or whatever, they might look at a team like West Virginia and be like, you know what? They're not as popular, but I saw what they did against Iowa. Like, that's not a bad team. I can go there and make a difference, or I can go there and learn, and I can go there and develop. So a lot of these teams that are giving the more popular teams a run for their money, I think are going to encourage even more young women to look into the sport of basketball and pursue it and take it more seriously. And we're going to start seeing even more schools emerge with even more stars. Now, something else that's really significant about the women's side of the tournament that I have to point out is the fact that it's grown so fast. So I'm about to pull up this video. Sorry, my screens got mixed up. I was trying to watch the Suns game before I went live with you guys. The Suns, hold on. Side note, y'all know I have ADHD, so like I'm gonna go off on a tangent real quick. But the Suns have to be one of the most schizophrenic NBA teams ever. How the hell do you lose to the Spurs and then beat the Denver Nuggets in the same week? That doesn't make any sense. None whatsoever. Anyway, let me pull up this video that came up just a couple years ago from the women's tournament.
I got something.
This is what they were dealing with.
So for the NCAA March Madness, the biggest tournament in college basketball for women, this is our weight room. Let me show y'all the men's weight room. Now, when pictures of our weight room got released versus the men's, the NCAA came out with a statement saying that it wasn't money, it was space that was a problem. Let me show y'all something else. Here's our practice court, right? And then here's that weight room. And then here's all this extra space. If you aren't upset about this problem, then you're a part of it.
Okay, so that was Sedona Prince, and that was just in 2021 when she put that video on TikTok that went viral, talking about the discrepancies between the weight rooms of the men's and the women's NCAA basketball tournament. And the discussion of the weight rooms ended up leading to a discussion about the discrepancies in investment and marketing and all sorts of stuff from there, right? So that was literally just in 2021, just 3 years ago, that we were having this problem with how men versus women were being treated when it came to college basketball. So you fast forward to September of that year, and that was when the NCAA decided, and a lot of people didn't even realize this, the NCAA decided that women's college basketball would be allowed to use the March Madness branding. So before that, the women's college basketball tournament, Division I, was not even referred to as March Madness. March Madness was reserved only for the men's side, and then the women were just women's Division I college basketball tournament. That was it. They didn't have a special name. They didn't have a special logo. That was it. So if you watch me a lot, you've heard me say about the NFL, when it comes to advancements that were made that benefit players, almost every advancement that was made in favor of players came about because someone sued the NFL. And then the NFL was like, we shouldn't do that. And unfortunately for the NCAA, it came about in a similar way. So they weren't sued, but a legal entity did come through and basically did an investigation and submitted a few reports to the NCAA about the discrepancies between the men's and women's college basketball tournaments, basically to encourage them to make different investments and budget differently. So this is in an article from USA Today that was published September 29th of 2021. And it says, the NCAA will use the March Madness phrasing and branding in conjunction with the women's basketball tournament beginning in 2022. Now, the fact that a legal entity had to come through and tell the NCAA that that would make a difference is crazy to me. And I don't know if they really didn't believe it would make a difference, or if the discrimination was that strong to where they just didn't want to call the women's tournament March Madness. But either way, before that day, legally, if you referred to the women's college basketball tournament as March Madness, you would have been in the wrong. But then they came around in 2021 and were like, yeah, starting in 22, we're going to refer to both tournaments as March Madness. Fucking genius. And so they said the brand recognition that March Madness carries will broaden marketing opportunities as we continue to work to elevate the women's basketball championship. Well, duh. They adding the March Madness trademark to the Division I, the Division I Women's Basketball Championship will enhance the development and public perception of the sport. Also, duh. So here's one of the things that, or one of the changes that came about through their investigation. So they said the NCAA will also use a zero-based budgeting method for the women's and men's championships, a shift from the traditional approach of adjusting budgets for these championship events from the previous fiscal year. So I'm not really sure how they were doing the budgeting, because like a zero-based budgeting method, all that means is that all the money that you make, you're going to spend it on something. So I don't know how they were doing it before, but it led to an increase in investment in the women's tournament. They go on to say this change is geared toward, quote, increasing opportunities for planning, collaboration, and cross promotion, as well as making the two championships more financially equitable, which you think would have already been a thing. I think a lot of times when people think about college sports and they think of Title IX, they think financial equity is a given. But there are so many ways that schools can kind of finagle the types of investments that they make in either sport and then call it equal, that sometimes when it comes to the actual financial investment, it's actually not equal. But on paper, they might make it look equal in other ways. So the law firm that worked on this was called Kaplan, Hecker, and Fink, LLP, and they specialize in employment and discrimination matters. So the report on gender inequity came after a flood of social media posts highlighting the different treatments of athletes at the men's and women's NCAA tournaments. In addition to the recommendation related to branding, the report concluded that the NCAA's model for revenue distribution, quote, prioritizes and rewards investment in men's basketball, and the NCAA should, quote, maximize value through gender equity by marketing the women's tournament as a standalone property. In other words, what the NCAA was doing was they were marketing men's basketball, right? And they were looking for sponsors and people to support it. And then having access and having your logo and having your business associated with the women's tournament was kind of a bonus, right? And I don't know how they ever thought that made sense, because it doesn't. The fan base for men's basketball and the fan base for women's basketball, they're two different things. Now, there's a little bit of overlap now, especially because of how the fan base for women's basketball has grown. But especially at this time, which once again was just 3 years ago, they were definitely separate. And so a whole ass law firm had to come in and tell the NCAA, like, hey, the way that you're trying to market women's basketball to people who are into men's basketball, not gonna work. You should actually find people who like women's basketball and then encourage them to invest in it, and you might do a little bit better. Like, it's the most common sense shit, but like the people who are making decisions for the NCAA didn't even take the time to consider whether or not that might actually work. So this all happened in 2021. Fast forward only 3 years later, technically two, because it wasn't until 2022 that the women's tournament was referred to as March Madness. So in 2 years, we've seen this level of growth in the recognition of stars in women's basketball, in the recognition of teams, in the recognition of coaches, and even in the ratings. So that's why I have to give a huge shout out to the women's college basketball tournament, because they've just like improved by leaps and bounds. A lot of it, I think, has to do with NIL and giving these young women the opportunity to market themselves and associate themselves with brands that make sense and with imagery and marketing campaigns that make sense for them. And that was something I said when NIL was first approved. I said that it was going to be a big deal for young women athletes, because now instead of the decision makers, a lot of the decision makers are people who, like the NCAA in general, just didn't know how to market women and didn't know how to make them appealing to people who would actually follow the stories and follow these teams, right? And so now these young women were able to say, like, we know how to market ourselves. Give us a little bit of room, give us a license to do it, and we can actually do something with this opportunity. And they 100% have. They've taken it and ran with it. So shout out to them. I'm going to take a quick second, read some of y'all's comments, and then we'll get into the next topic. The hip drop tackle, we're going to get to in a second. Let's see. Yeah, Clemens posted a lot of stuff that I'm going to get to later, so we won't worry about that right now. All right. So that's the first part of shout outs and call outs. Let me see if there's any other small ones I wanted to get to. There are a few, but they're not really relevant right now. I was going to talk about Pittsburgh and their whole quarterback situation, but I'll save that for another episode. But I do think that's going to lead to some fun conversations this season as we get into just seeing what Russell Wilson and Justin Fields put on the field. But I do believe that's going to lead to some interesting conversations. especially because a lot of people are just automatically expecting Russell Wilson to just go out there and be the starter, like not much competition. And that might be the case, especially at training camp, considering the amount of experience that Russell Wilson has. I think for a veteran with his level of experience, it's going to be really hard for him to go into training camp and not do well. But I do think there will come a time where Justin Fields will get an opportunity, and I think he's going to take that opportunity by the horns. But we'll save all that commentary for later. So the next, I don't know, this is part shout out, part call out, but this goes out to the NFL. So this is another tab that closed on me, so hold on to for just a second. But they had a few rules changes that came about over the past week or so. So first couple of shout outs that are a little bit less significant than the rules changes. They're going to televise more live football this spring on the NFL Network. And no, it's not going to be the UFL. The UFL actually is maintaining the media rights deals that the XFL and the USFL had separately. So the USFL had a media rights deal with Fox. The XFL had a media rights deal with ESPN. So now the UFL has a media rights deal with Fox and ESPN combined. And there's details to that, but yeah, it's going to be broadcast on both those channels. The NFL Network is going to be airing content from some even smaller leagues. So there's the Overtime Football League and the Arena Football League. So if you're into that, it'll be on the NFL Network this spring. And there's going to be a new series on Netflix called Receiver. So if you saw the quarterback series on Netflix, there's going to be a new one called Receiver. Let me see if they say who's going to be on it. No, they have not listed who's going to be on it. But it'll be the same idea as the quarterback series. And so, yeah, something to look forward to on Netflix. All right. Now, let's get into these approved playing rules. I'm going to try to bring up the actual rules on the screen for you guys so that we can read along with them together. The two major ones that a lot of people are talking about are the kickoff rule and the hip drop tackle rule. And so I want to bring them up on the screen because, especially for the hip drop tackle rule, I believe the verbiage is very important. Now, when it first came up that this rule was going to be submitted and probably approved, I was not in favor for a couple of reasons. So one of the main reasons is that I feel like what you're risking is penalizing defensive players for the shortcomings of offensive players. And what I mean by that is that when it comes to the dangerous part of that tackle, right, a lot of it, at least from my perspective and the perspective of many others, a lot of the dangerous part of that tackle had to do with offensive players trying to get just a couple more inches, a couple more feet, and extending their body. Now, anyone who's ever played a contact sport, whether it's football or rugby or roller derby, we're all taught at some point that there's a safe way to fall or a safe way to be tackled or certain things that we want to be aware of when we know somebody's coming in to make contact or coming in to tackle us. In derby, it was hitting. Hold on, I can't hear myself. Oh, now I can. And just knowing that there are certain things that you don't want to do when you're being tackled. So I've never played tackle football, but rugby gets pretty close, in my opinion. So when I started seeing, this dangerous rhetoric about the hip drop tackle, and I start looking at it, because it's not like that tackle just came about in the last 2 years, right? Like, people have been tackling that way for a while. But what's changed now is that you have these offensive players who are trying to get a couple more feet, a couple more yards, and instead of falling small and protecting their appendages, they are extending not only their arms, but also their feet, which causes their legs to be extended under a player who's falling down, and they are basically putting their own legs and feet and ankles in a dangerous position a lot of the times. Now, every now and then there's going to be that fluke where that doesn't apply. But in a lot of those situations, if you watch when they look dangerous or when people are like, oh, that didn't look good, it's because instead of dealing with the tackle in a safe way, the offensive players is trying to extend. And so I'm just like, well, why would you penalize these defensive players when it's actually the offensive players that should be doing something different? So let me pull this up. It was proposal number 8. So let me find proposal number 8 here, and I'll bring it up on the screen for you. Sorry, they have a couple of different different links to look up the full text of the full rules. So give me just 1 second. Okay, these are their bylaws. Dear NFL, please organize your information just a little bit better. Okay, I think it might be this one. Nope. Kelvin said, no, I did not freeze, Kelvin. I'm literally just looking for something. I don't know if you were here a second ago, but I said whenever right as I went to go live, everything, like my window where I had all my tabs open, it crashed. So I'm having to find everything again, basically. Okay, I think I finally got it. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you think I froze. But this is really important. The wording here is really important because the wording that they use for this rule is basically what paints my interpretation of it as far as whether or not, I'm not going to say whether or not it's a good or bad thing because I still am not really a fan of it. But I think it might not be as detrimental as I originally thought. So here's the actual proposal. And so basically everything in red is what they're adding. So what they're adding is an entirely new article to this rule. So they're amending Rule 12, Section 2, and they're adding a new article, which is Article 18, which is right here in red. So here's how they wrote the rule about the hip drop tackle. It says, it is a foul if a player uses the following technique to bring a runner to the ground. A, grabs the runner with both hands or wraps the runner with both arms, and B, unweights himself by swiveling and dropping his hips and or lower body, landing on and trapping the runner's legs at or below the knee. So that last part is what I think will actually save this rule for a lot of people. Because thinking about just the hip drop tackle itself and banning it, I'm just like, that's bullshit. How do you want people to tackle? It's a high speed sport with lots of contact. And it just kind of felt like what they were asking players to do is do a lot of thinking going into a tackle, right? But it's this last part where it says landing on and trapping the runner's legs at or below the knee. And next, at the end of part A, it says and. So in other words, they would have to perform the hip drop tackle and they would have to land on and trap the runner's legs at or below the knee. So that is something that doesn't happen nearly as often as the tackle itself. And you might be thinking, well, what if a player puts themselves in that position on purpose in order to force a penalty? Honestly, being in that position is so dangerous. I can't see any player doing it like on purpose with trying to draw a penalty in mind. Now, the situation I just described a second ago where they're trying to get more yards or whatever, that's a situation where it happens and they do end up extending. But I don't think they're putting their legs under that player on purpose. I think in those situations they're just thinking about the wrong thing. So I do still think that offensive players need to go back to that adjustment where they protect their appendages whenever they're being tackled this way. But I also think that it's an easier adjustment to try not to land on an opposing player's legs than to try not to execute this tackle at all. So even though I'm not a fan of it, the fact that they included this wording about landing on and trapping the runner's legs in order for it to be a penalty, I'm like, okay, there is a little bit of room for defensive players to train themselves to perform this tackle without getting a penalty. It kind of sucks that the onus is being put on them, but I mean, it's better than outlawing the tackle altogether, is all I say. So we'll just see how it goes. This might be one of those things where it's like, okay, it's in place this year. Next year it changes, whatever. But that's the part of the rule that kind of saves it for me and takes me from saying, hey, this rule is stupid and they should have never put it in place, to being like, okay, we'll kind of see how it goes and see how people adjust. Clement says, football is becoming more and more like flag football. If you're a defensive player, how are you supposed to tackle an offensive player in a violent high-speed sport? I agree. And in this case, you just try not to land on their legs. That's like the one thing that you can do to save yourself. But one thing that I will also say about flag football is that while people keep saying it's becoming more and more like flag football, tackle football is still light years away from becoming flag football. There are still so many differences. So yeah, I understand people being upset about a lot of the contact and aggression being taken out of the sport, but yeah, we're still a long ways away from flag football, so it'll be all right. Another rule that was approved, and this is the one that everybody's been talking about today, is the kickoff rule. So I was watching NFL Live and I thought they did an excellent presentation of this particular rule. So I'm going to show you all the verbiage of it, and then I'm going to show y'all the video that that they did on NFL Live, because I feel like it portrays the rule in a different way. And it was a really excellent way of explaining it. So the approved rule was proposal number 10A. There were a bunch of proposals, y'all. So not all of them were approved, and maybe one day we'll have fun with the ones that weren't approved. So this is a really long one. I'm going to pretty much skim through it, but it's proposal 10A, and they're implementing it for 1 year only right now. And so it's a procedure for a free kick. And Article 1 says a free kick is a kickoff or a safety kick that puts the ball in play to start a free kick down. It must be made from any point on the kicking team restraining line and between the inbound lines. And so once again, this is an amendment to rule number 6. They've got pictures to go along with it. So let's see if this is the part where they describe it. Okay, so the kicker's restraining line is its 35-yard line for a kickoff and 20-yard line for a safety kick. And it goes on to describe how the restraining line for the receiving team shall be the 30-yard line, 30 yards in advance of the kicker's restraining line, and 5 yards in advance of the kicking team's restraining line. In other words, they're going to start off closer together. And basically, instead of just starting to run towards each other as soon as the ball is kicked, they won't start running towards each other until what's shown in this picture as the landing zone, until the ball ends up in that zone. So basically, the players are going to start off closer together, but it's going to be a longer wait before they start running towards each other, which should create for more dynamic scenarios. But what they're really trying to eliminate is the high-speed contact and then running at each other at full speed. So the way they changed the kickoff last year was intended to decrease concussions. And this is basically a way that they feel like they can decrease concussions, but also still make the kickoff more exciting. And I wanted to scroll down to the part where it talks about, this is why I'm not reading the whole thing. It's like a multi 10, 12 page proposal. It's wild. But the Cowboys' own John Fossil was one of the people who played a role in implementing this. And so I'm going to go ahead and play y'all the video of the explanation and also let y'all hear what John Fossil had to say about it. I'm not frozen. I'm pulling up a video. All right, here we go.
New rule, the kicker would remain in his normal spot. The rest of the kickoff team would line up on the receiving team's 40-yard line, and the receiving team would line up 5 yards away on their 35-yard line. Nobody would be allowed to move past those lines until the ball is touched or reaches the target zone, the area from the 20-yard line to the goal line. The next proposal would also impact the kickoff. After only 5.2% of onside kicks were recovered in 2023, and just 2 surprise onside kicks, the competition committee is looking for some give and take. The new rule would allow the kicking team to utilize an unbalanced formation, with 6 players on one side of the kicker and 4 on the other to raise the odds of a recovery. But in order to do so, the kicking team would be required to declare their intentions of an onside kick before the play. That's necessary since that other kickoff proposal has a new setup zone. As a result of these proposals, touchbacks could also change. If the ball is kicked into the end zone, the receiving team gets it at the 35-yard line. If the ball is kicked into the target zone and rolls into the end zone, the receiving team possession would start at the 20-yard line.
Well explained.
I'm going to go back to the beginning really quick, just to make sure we all saw that part.
The kicker would remain in his normal spot. The rest of the kickoff team would line up on the receiving team's 40-yard line, and the receiving team would line up 5 yards away on their 35-yard line. Nobody would be allowed to move past those lines until the ball is touched or reaches the target zone, the area from the 20-yard line to the goal line. The next proposal would also impact the...
So basically, this is going to affect kickoffs as well as onside kicks.
End zone. The receiving team gets it at the 35-yard line. If the ball is kicked into the target zone and rolls into the end zone, the receiving team possession would start at the 20-yard line.
Well explained, some nice visuals there. And if you're wondering what a kickoff return for a touchdown will look like under these new rules, well, check out Fred Brown of XFL's San Antonio Brahmas, who had this 96-yard return for a score. It was the lone kickoff return touchdown in the league last season, but pretty exciting either way.
We feel this is a great day for the NFL. You know, we've taken a play that's essentially been dying over the course of the last few years, and in our opinion, we've revived it. And you know, in a year where obviously you have a player going into the Hall of Fame, with Devin Hester going to the Hall of Fame as a kick returner, it's kind of ironic that this happens to be that year that we're bringing this play back. And there are some components of this play, the hybrid kickoff, that mirrors some of the images that you're going to see from XFL. At the same time, there's a lot of differences, and we felt, you know, John and myself, when we first started this thing, we felt like they got a lot of things right, and there was a lot of really good things about the XFL. At the same time, we felt there was a lot of things that they could have done better. And so I think that's when you look at the modifications we've made.
The kickoff returner value is going to skyrocket because of the amount of times that guy's going to have his hands on the ball. So I think that's going to be something that one of the reasons maybe we wanted to get this done now is because the draft's coming up and it didn't want to be tabled until May.
All right. So that's a pretty roundabout explanation of the rule. Let me know if y'all need to see that video again. But yeah, essentially, I'm excited about this one because one is going to add more excitement to the games, because depending on how special teams is set up or what personnel you decide to put out there, this is something that's going to have a huge impact on field position. It could even increase the number of kickoff returns for touchdowns that we see. So obviously for people like Kavontae Turpin, this is going to be a big deal because something like this would actually make it easier for blockers to create paths for him. And this is also an area where we might see players like Deuce Vaughn increase their value, right? I feel like they had a little bit of trouble finding a good role for Deuce Vaughn, but putting him back there as the receiver to receive the kickoff and actually putting him in a position to be right behind people who will start blocking for him as soon as he catches the ball could actually make it easier for him to also, find different pathways and find a route to get further downfield and maybe score a couple of touchdowns throughout the season. So they implemented it. I cannot talk tonight. It's late. They implemented it in the XFL. It was really exciting for anybody who watched the XFL, and I believe they're keeping it in the UFL. It's slightly different, but we don't need to get into all those details. But one of the things that they just said in that video was that there was only one return for a touchdown in the XFL. But the skill level is a little bit different in the XFL. I think we'll see a little bit more excitement on the NFL level just because of the level of talent that we have on NFL teams, and also because of how I think teams are really going to look to use this to their advantage. I think we might see a few less occurrences of just like random no-name players on special teams. I think people are going to really be looking for some real playmakers on their special teams now, because now those playmakers have like way, way better odds of actually making impactful blocks and making a path for the runner to actually get really far downfield. So this is going to make kickoffs really interesting. I'm excited. Willie said, how on earth is the defender supposed to tackle? Oh, yeah, we talked about that a second ago. I don't have anything else to say about the hip drop tackle. Don't land on dude's legs. That's it. Don't land on dude's legs. And if it's an issue, then I'm sure that the NFLPA will be glad to address it. But yeah, I think I'm all out of outrage when it comes to that topic. I know a lot of people are outraged, but I've been outraged since they said that they might outlaw it in the first place. And so now I'm just like, okay, they actually did it. Whatever. I'm over it. I'll say one more thing on it, though. This is a rule that was voted on by team owners. And something that's come up, especially for Dallas Cowboys fans this offseason, is the different priorities of team owners versus people who actually play the sport and people who love the sport, right? And so in this instance, we're seeing a situation where their goal is to protect their assets. They look at their players as people that they want to protect, people that they're investing in, that they need to keep on the field. So they're like, oh, this tackle looks dangerous. We'll get rid of it because it could potentially damage our investment. But, we're already hearing outcry from people who actually play the game. We're already hearing outcry from people who actually enjoy watching the game. We're hearing an outcry from the NFLPA. But these are people who actually like the game. Some of these NFL owners don't actually like football like that. They don't actually even know football like that. They just know it makes them money. And other than that, it's like, did y'all ever, there was one of the broadcasts of Thursday Night Football on Amazon. Keke Palmer was on one of the broadcasts. And they were like, oh, I didn't know you were a football fan. And she was like, I'm not really a football fan. I'm just here for the vibes. And I feel like that's how a lot of owners are. They really didn't make that change with the excitement and quality of the game in mind in terms of how fans feel about it and how players feel about playing it. They did that from their perspective based on their desire to protect their assets and their investments. Whereas players have completely different interests in mind. And I really wish they would have taken more input from the players and from the NFLPA when making that decision. But hey, they got the billions, they got the power. Here we are. All right. I think that might be the last shout out before we get into the most important topic of the night. And that is Dak Prescott's extortion lawsuit. This is another window that closed. So let me make sure I can pull this up because this is something I definitely want to put on the screen for you guys. So I got a copy of the lawsuit, right? And I started reading through it. And I had a lot of thoughts. And one of the reasons why I had a lot of thoughts was because Where on earth is this document? But I had a lot of thoughts. I'm going to try to talk to y'all and actually look for this document at the same time. I had a lot of thoughts because I heard about this situation after it became a big deal on 105.3 The Fan. And for those of you who are not familiar with that situation, basically on 105.3 The Fan, they had the attorney for Dak's accuser go onto the station, and this particular person was using all kinds of language that I felt like it was just irresponsible for them to allow to air. So here's the thing, and I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to say two things. First of all, I don't plan on getting into the details of the situation yet, but if anybody is watching who is sensitive to topics related to sexual assault, just know I'm about to get into it. There might be certain terms and certain descriptions that are used that may make you uncomfortable or trigger you. So this is your warning right now that we're about to get into this topic. And once I start talking about it, you might not get another warning. So if you are watching this on replay, check the timestamps in the description, and you can skip to the next section if this is something that you don't want to talk about. If you're watching this live, just come back in a little bit, and yeah. But yeah, we're about to get into it. So, I just don't want to trigger anybody or make anybody upset. But the other thing that I'm going to say is that the reason why I struggled with addressing what was said on the radio station was because I didn't want it to seem like criticizing what happened on the radio station was a defense of Dak Prescott. Because I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know whether he's innocent or guilty. I don't. I don't want it to be true. Like, here's a struggle with it, right? I don't want it to be true because of just how that would impact so many people. Not even just the fan base, but the way people tend to put their faith in and trust people who are philanthropic, people who seem to have goodwill towards other people. Like, there are some people who would really, really be shaken up by that news, right? But at the same time, there have been so many situations lately where accusations like this turn out to not be true. I'm like, please don't let this be another one. Like, it is becoming harder and harder for people to believe women at all when they say things like this. And so for this to be yet another high profile case that turns out to not be true, it would just be another strike, another harm done, honestly, to all the women who actually have been through situations like this and have had a hard time getting people to believe them. And whenever people say, well, we have to question you, we have to doubt you, we have to bring up evidence against you, it's situations like this that they point to, right? Okay, I'm not finding it on my computer. I'm going to bring it up on my phone, send it to my Google Drive, and then I'll pull it up on the screen for you guys. All right, it is being uploaded. So in a second, I'll have it on the screen for you guys, and we can kind of look at it together. Here we go. All right. So I've been honestly also struggling with playing the audio, with whether or not I should play the audio for you guys, because y'all know how I normally do. I'll pull up the audio or a video of a particular situation or a story, and I'll kind of pause it and I'll kind of give feedback. But it's like, I don't even want the accusations repeated on my show. But if you haven't heard it, let me know and I'll think about playing it live for you guys. But yeah, essentially this particular attorney went on the radio station, and he said things in a very matter-of-fact way. So here's the thing. When it comes to things like libel and slander, those are very specific terms used for different types of defamation. Okay, so in the case of journalists, whenever we are talking to someone, whenever we are interviewing someone, even if we're not the person making the statement, we have the responsibility, and it's something that's called what some documents will refer to as a high level of care. In other words, ethically, even if I'm not the person making a statement, I have to consider my listeners, I have to consider my readers, and make sure that I take the responsibility of letting you guys know that what this person is saying is just an allegation. So in other words, let's say I had the accuser's attorney come on to my show. They come on Bitches Love Sports, and I'm talking to them, and they say, Dak Prescott is a rapist. What I'm supposed to say to you guys is say, now let's keep in mind, these are allegations made by this particular young woman, right? I'm supposed to stop intermittently and remind you guys that these are allegations, that these are reports, that nothing has been proven, the trial is not concluded, Dak Prescott has not been convicted of anything. That is one of the areas where they definitely fell short, right? So when it comes to, are they guilty of defamation? That's for a judge to determine. But when it comes to negligence, like, yeah, they were definitely negligent in that. At no point did they ever stop and say, like, okay, these are allegations. Okay, these are reports. Okay, this is your perspective. Now, here's the other thing that really upset me. And I'm going to pull this up on the screen so that you guys can see it. And I said this at the beginning of the show, but it's like, if y'all have any particular questions or any concerns related to this that you want to address, feel free to put them in the chat. I won't judge you. I might not address every single thing depending on what you ask or depending on what you say, but I do want this to be a place where we can kind of talk about this. So I'm going to zoom in on this. So this is the top of, it's called the plaintiff's original petition. This is a lawsuit, right? So you see plaintiff Rain Dakota Prescott. Cool. We knew that. But under defendants, it's 3 people listed. The first person listed is the woman who made the accusations against Dak Prescott. The other 2 people are her attorneys. This person right here is the person that was on the radio station speaking at will about Dak Prescott. So as soon as I saw this, I had to put everything that happened on 105.3 in a different context. And so there were some people who said, like, oh, well, they had the attorney of the accuser on the radio station. But if we put it in a different context, looking at this is a lawsuit for extortion. Then you have to say the flagship radio station of the Dallas Cowboys allowed. Okay, let me back up. This is the flagship radio station of the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott is the star quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott is suing 3 people for extortion, and one of those people was allowed to go on the radio and speak pretty much in an unbridled fashion about their accusations of Dak Prescott. So if you remove the context of them being this woman's attorney and you instead replace it with, this is one of the people named in a lawsuit, an extortion lawsuit, it's just kind of like, okay, what on earth made them think that that was okay? I see a comment came through and I want to look at it. Okay, so this is a valid point made by Flowman. He said the ultimate principle isn't that women aren't believed when they say they've been done wrong. It's the circumstances in which many come forward that calls everything into question. That's valid. And I definitely understand what you're saying there, because if you look at the situations in which there are questions, sometimes those questions are valid. So, for example, one of the questions that came up when this attorney was questioned on the radio station was, well, why now? And that's a question that comes up a lot in situations like these. And yes, it is a woman being questioned, but it is also a valid question, especially in this case where it's like, okay, it's been 7 years. But just taking it step by step, they allowed somebody that is being sued for extortion. So basically, for anybody who's not familiar, essentially an extortion case is someone saying, hey, this person is bringing false charges against me, And they basically said that if I don't pay them a certain amount of money, they're going to create problems for me. If I don't pay them a certain amount of money, they're going to go public. If I don't pay them a certain amount of money, they're going to bring criminal charges against me. So that is extortion. That is what Dak Prescott is saying these three people are doing to him. And this radio station was like, well, we're going to allow one of these people to just come on the radio and talk and say whatever they want. And we're not going to stop them. We're not going to pause and say that these are allegations. We are not going to question them. Well, I mean, they ask questions, but like not in a way that would bring about both, support and doubt. They pretty much ask questions that would bring about like support. It was almost like they wanted people to believe what this guy was saying. And they did it under the guise of this guy being an attorney. But it's like, no, as a journalist, you have to be responsible and address the fact that this guy isn't just an attorney. This is one of the people that's named in the lawsuit. The other issue that I had was later, someone made the statement of, oh, well, we invited Dak Prescott's, actually, it wasn't even later. During that same segment, they were like, we invited Dak Prescott's attorney to come on to the show and he declined. Now, here's the thing about Dak Prescott's attorney. Dak Prescott's attorney is a man named Levi McCathern. Levi McCathern is not new to this. Anybody who covers the Cowboys has heard that name before. Levi McCathern has defended Jerry Jones. Levi McCathern has defended Michael Irvin, sorry. And now Levi McCathern is defending Dak Prescott. And I point that out to say, we've seen enough of this guy to know how he rolls. Without even knowing that they asked, I could tell you that he's not going to go on some radio station and do an interview, especially not a radio station that is essentially known for questionable at best, defamatory sometimes comments about his client. And when they're not doing that, a lot of what they do is a lot of shock jock and hot take stuff. That's not his style. Anytime we see Levi McCathern talking in public, he and his clients are in suits. They hold a formal press conference. They invite select members of the media, and they say whatever it is that they need to say publicly. They don't really do like radio station interviews and stuff like that. So to say you invited him on as though there was a reasonable expectation of him to accept that invitation, that's really questionable to me. Because even me, for the short time that I've been a Cowboys fan, I hear that name and I know that man is not going on anybody's radio station and doing an interview. So to use that as a defense to me, that was kind of a cop-out in my opinion. So now we're going to get to the details of this suit in a second. But before we get to that, I want to get to the accusations made by Victoria Shores. And this is definitely one of the parts for anybody who's watching or listening where we get into some details and some terminology that may be triggering. But this was the demand letter that they submitted to, I'm assuming, Dak Prescott. So in the interview that they did, they said that they tried to find the correct personnel in order to get this demand letter to Dak Prescott. And apparently it was delivered to electronic mail to redacted@athletics.msstate.edu. So Mississippi State, for those who are not aware, is where Dak Prescott attended college. And for whatever reason, that was the only email address they could find for him. I don't know why they had a harder time getting a more recent email address or getting in touch with somebody who's within the Cowboys organization now. But this is where it was sent via electronic mail to his Mississippi State email address. Or, well, I'm assuming it's his, to somebody's Mississippi State email address. It could have been sent to somebody else who then sent it to Dak. I don't know. It's redacted. And I have reasons to believe that that's his email address. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But it's to somebody's. It was sent on January 16th, 2024, which for those of you who are following along in your textbooks was just a few days after the Dallas Cowboys lost that playoff game to the Green Bay Packers. So January 16th, I believe, was a Tuesday. Let's see. Yep, January 16th was a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday after that particular playoff loss. And the date of the incident is cited as February 2nd, 2017. So they were almost at the 7-year mark here. So I'm going to read this verbatim. Once again, there are some triggering phrases and statements made here. So if you're sensitive to topics of sexual assault, please mute for a moment or go watch South Park or something. It says, "Dear Mr. Prescott, our law firm, I can talk, y'all, I promise. Our law firm has been retained to represent Victoria Bailey Shores, hereinafter referred to as Miss Shores, for injuries she sustained as a result of a sexual assault committed by you on or about February 2nd, 2017. You and Miss Shores became acquainted through her employment and exchanged information. Communication ensued between you both via Snapchat, and you invited her to hang out. Thereafter, on or about February 2nd, 2017, you and Miss Shores, along with 2 members of your entourage and a couple additional female friends, met at Redacted in Plano. At some point, you, Miss Shores, along with the 2 members of your entourage, entered your black SUV-style vehicle. You directed Miss Shores to the furthest back row so you could all head to Redacted. On the ride to Redacted, you exposed your genitalia. Miss Shores did not want to engage in sexual intercourse and made sure to verbalize her wishes. Afterwards, the car came to a stop at your destination. Once this occurred, everyone got out of the car except you, and you further signaled to one of your entourage members to leave you and Miss Shores alone. At this point, you used physical force and sexually assaulted Miss Shores by penetrating her vagina against her consent. Miss Shores has had to live with this pain and trauma for 7 years. It affected her relationship with her fiancé and her everyday existence so much that she had to attend therapy and counseling and will require future therapy and counseling. She has suffered mental anguish that is unimaginable dealing with the trauma of being a sexual assault of victim." I think there's a typo there. "Despite the tragic events, she is willing to forego pursuing criminal charges along with disclosing the information to the public in exchange for compensating her for the mental anguish she has suffered. Ms. Shore's damages are valued at the sum of $100 million. You have until February 16, 2024 to respond to this demand letter. To discuss this matter, please have your attorneys reach out to us at redacted. Please direct all communications exclusively to our office. We hope to resolve this matter privately and amicably and look forward to working with you. Sincerely," and then signed by the attorneys. Okay. So, in the interview about this particular demand letter, or I should say in the interview on the radio station, when this particular demand letter was brought up, the attorney, who was also a defendant in this lawsuit, said that there was nothing extortionist about it. Now, even if you don't just Google this letter, if you were to Google or research the topic of demand letters and how they are used in various situations, especially when it comes to civil cases like this one, there are actually a lot of attorneys and judges who say that there is a fine line between demand letters and extortion in general. So not even with this one in specifically, but just in general that there's a fine line. So to say that there's nothing extortionist about your demand letter is kind of hyperbole in a sense, because by issuing a demand letter, according to several legal professionals, you are tiptoeing along the line of extortion. So you have to be very, very careful with your verbiage. Now, I do believe that there are certain things in their verbiage that might protect them. I'm not an attorney or a judge, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. But if you were reading that along with me, or if you were listening to that and you were like, that's questionable, just know you're not the only person who thought that. Flowman says this letter is amateurish. I don't disagree with you there. And as a matter of fact, these couple of attorneys, there's a lot of things that I would consider amateurish. 2 of them being this letter, and also the fact that one of them went on the radio station while they are not only the attorney representing their client in a very sensitive case, because there are criminal charges that have been filed, right? But also the fact that you're a defendant in an extortion suit. And you go you could have held a press conference or something if you just had to say something. But you went on 105.3 The Fan on a sports show. Honestly, I think it's kind of a bad look, in my opinion. Yeah. Flowman said the very fact that they say they'll forego criminal charges is what makes it extortion. Kind of. So they said they'll forego criminal charges in exchange for compensating her for mental anguish she suffered. So the fact that they're saying that this is the value of the damages she suffered is what kind of makes it where, like, okay, they're not saying, give me, okay, it sounds like it. Here, let me use another example. Completely unrelated. When it comes to prostitution, right? The law says that when money changes hands for sex, that is prostitution. Now, if I say, pay my electric bill and I'll have sex with you, money doesn't change hands. So that is technically not prostitution, right? Or if you are shooting porn and you say, I didn't pay that woman to have sex with me, I paid her to let me film it. That's not prostitution. That is creating pornography, right? So when it comes to what, like how the money is being exchanged and what it's being exchanged for and how that relates to certain legal instances, there's like a very fine line. So had they said, give us $100 million or there will be criminal charges filed, it would definitely be extortion. But the fact that they're saying like, hey, all we want is for you to cover the damages and then we won't file criminal charges. That's where it turns into like, okay, that's a little bit more tricky. Let a judge look at it. Or in this case, Dak Prescott is requesting a trial by jury and they'll decide. What makes it really suspect, though, is the $100 million value. Because if you think about the statistics regarding rape victims, how many of them can actually claim $100 million in damages? How many of them have claimed that? So I think proving that her damages came to that amount is going to be the tricky part, in my opinion. But we'll see. But Dak's attorneys agree with you, Flo, man. In their introduction, it says, this case arises out of a blatant attempt by Victoria Shores and her legal team to extort plaintiff Dak Prescott by weaponizing patently false yet heinous sexual assault allegations with no basis in reality. Consider the following excerpt from the defendant's extortionary letter attached here to as Exhibit A. And they highlight exactly what you just said. Ms. Shores is willing to forego pursuing criminal charges along with disclosing this information to the public in exchange for compensating her for the mental anguish she has suffered. Ms. Shores' damages are valued at the sum of $100 million. So they go on to say, and this is typical in a petition like this. So they talk about the fact that, you know, not only did Dak not do this, but he's not the type to do anything like this ever. Goes on to talk about his role with the Dallas Cowboys, the fact that he's a philanthropist, what he does with Faith Fight Finish. Now, part 4 is where they go back into discussing extortion. They say, now at the height of Mr. Prescott's success, defendants and her legal team have unleashed a campaign of extortion and defamation, threatening to go public with a completely fabricated story of sexual assault from nearly a decade ago and demanding that Mr. Prescott immediately pay $100 million in exchange for her silence. So the word immediate, people might question that, but yeah, to send a letter on January 16th and demand a reply basically less than a month later, that's like, you know, a pretty short amount of time. As such, Mr. Prescott has reported defendants' criminal actions to the appropriate authorities and will continue to cooperate fully in their investigation. So for anyone who's not keeping track, there are actually 2 investigations going on right now. There's the investigation of extortion, and then also criminal charges have been filed against Dak. And so supposedly that is being investigated as well by 2 different precincts. It goes on to list the parties, goes on to list the jurisdiction and venue, and then the factual background. So they recap what was stated in the demand letter, and then it talks about what happened after Dak got the demand letter. So they say at the time of the alleged assault, Mr. Prescott was single, and in fact, the timeline of events and defendant Shore's actions in the 7 years since the alleged assault are consistent with being involved with only consensual actions with Mr. Prescott. The fact that Mr. Prescott did not hear a single negative thing about this supposed interaction from nearly a decade ago is truly telling of the defendant's motives. After receiving the aforementioned correspondence, counsel for Mr. Prescott reached out to confer with defendant Shore's counsel to confer on the matter. as surely she would not so blatantly attempt to extort a highly successful NFL quarterback at the height of his career. But defendants Bethel, I don't want to mispronounce her name, but I believe it's Zehaie, and Yoel Zehaie confirmed their motives when they confirmed on a phone call that 1, all civil causes of action have expired, and 2, the sole reason for their demand of $100 million from Mr. Prescott was to forego criminal charges and for not making the alleged assault public. So what the petition is essentially saying here is that, like, okay, in the letter, they said the $100 million is for damages, but when we called them on the phone, they said they wanted $100 million to not go public and not file charges. So that's where it goes from just being an extortionary letter to, if this is true, an extortionary phone call. Flowman says the reason being its damages is a civil litigation issue. However, I might be wrong, but the statute of limitations on a civil case expired, so the criminal liability is all they could leverage. Well, are you a lawyer? Have you read this petition already? No, but that's essentially what they're saying. They confirmed on the phone call. They said all civil causes of action have expired, which definitely coincides with what you just said, which is that the statute of limitations for the civil part has expired. In other words, even if it was a well-written demand letter, it came too late for those who are following along. All right. So now causes of action is where we kind of get into the details of this particular suit and what the accusations by Dak actually are. So we read, you graduated Georgetown Law. Nice. Well, thanks for popping in and offering your expertise. But yeah, so this section, causes of action, is where we get into what the actual accusations are. So in the demand letter, we saw what the accusations against Dak are. This is where Dak and his attorneys say, okay, here's what we're accusing the defendants of. So the first part is defamation and slander, which is pretty obvious based on the statements made in the demand letter. So he's basically saying, hey, not only is this not true, but to say this about me and to go public with it is to defame my character. And then they go and add defamation per se. And I'll go ahead and read that to y'all verbatim. It says, plaintiff incorporates by reference each and every allegation contained in the paragraphs above, as if the same were set forth in full herein. Defendant's false and malicious statements negatively affected Mr. Prescott and his business, profession, occupation, and reputation. So that's one of those things that when it comes to defamation, for some people, it's kind of hard to prove because you have to prove harm, you have to prove damages. And if you've been listening to some of the questions that people have asked, some of the people associated with the Cowboys, like people have been asking members of the front office, the Joneses, Mike McCarthy, like, hey, you know, this situation with the accusations against Dak, is that affecting his contract negotiations? If any of them were to say yes, which they're not, even if it was, they're not going to say that. But if any of them were to say yes, that would prove harm and damages. So I don't know if Dak and his attorneys have proof that it actually has impacted his contract negotiations, or if there's some other business that Dak does or some other aspect of that business that has been impacted by this. So like, for example, I saw a Sleep Number bed commercial earlier today that had a bunch of no names on it, but for the longest time, Sleep Number had been using like athletes. So if Dak Prescott has an email from Sleep Number that says, hey, until this blows over, we're going to kind of pause the campaigns that involve you. That is proof that it has affected his business, profession, and reputation, because his association with that brand is part of his brand. It's part of what he does as a quarterback for Dallas Cowboys, and it's being impacted by this situation. Each of the above referenced acts and omissions, singly or in combination with others, constituted defamation per se, which proximately caused the general and special damages suffered by Mr. Prescott, which are in excess of the minimum jurisdictional limits of the court. So basically, not only did it cause damages, but it caused enough damages for us to mention it in this petition. All right, civil extortion and duress. So basically, this is a part where they're saying, okay, all right, so the defamation was basically saying, hey, you're ruining my reputation, you're hurting my business. Duress is where you say, like, all right, you impacting all that is also impacting me mentally and emotionally. So basically, the same way Victoria Shores said that she suffered mental and emotional damages because of what she went through, this is where Dak's attorneys are saying, like, hey, Dak is actually suffering because he's having to deal with this issue and these charges are false. Business disparagement, that's definitely related to what we were talking about earlier. But in this section, it specifically references his business as a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. So that'll be interesting. Now, keep in mind, Dak requested a trial by jury. If this actually is not settled out of court and does go to a trial by jury, in order to prove this particular section of the petition, they're going to have to prove that his contract was, or his contract negotiations, or some aspect of his business as a quarterback for the Cowboys was impacted by this. And keep in mind, to this point, everybody has said, oh, no, we're 100% behind Dak. It's not impacting anything. You know, we have other concerns. So this particular section is probably one of the biggest sections of concerns to fans. Not saying that it should be, but just going by the reactions to different statements made by people like Des Bryant recently and other former players, and how fans seem to be so invested in the inner workings of the front office, I can see news like this coming out and definitely shaking up the fan base. Tortious interference with current and or prospective business relations. So that's more impact on the business. And here's something else where they mention the NFL specifically. It says defendants were aware of the existence of these economic relationships and intended to interfere with and disrupt them, particularly ahead of the NFL's free agency period opening on March 13th, 2024. So this is basically Dak's representation saying, hey, the timing of this happened on purpose. You did this before free agency and at a time when I'm trying to complete contract negotiations to put additional pressure on me to pay you, even though these accusations are false. And that's messed up. And civil conspiracy. Plaintiff incorporates by reference each and every allegation contained. Oh, that's the beginning of every section. So defendants have engaged in a conspiracy to extort, defame, disparage, and tortiously interfere with Mr. Prescott's existing and prospective contracts. So all that's essentially saying is like, okay, everything earlier that we said they didn't do it on accident. They got together, they talked about it, and they decided that they were going to do this. And intentional infliction of emotional distress, that's further support that this was, or that's them claiming further support that this was intentional. And then we get to actual damages. So they say essentially the same thing, that Dak has suffered damages and will continue to suffer damages. But the damages that he's asking for is actually, and this is the part that I don't know if everybody is aware of. Where is it? Nope, that's back to Exhibit A. Okay, it might not be in that section, but I think it was in the very beginning where it talked about what he was demanding. And I've heard a couple of people bring this up, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page about it. Why can I not find it? Well, essentially, in this lawsuit, although Dak has, oh, here it is. Plaintiff is seeking monetary relief in excess of $1 million, including damages of any kind, attorney's fees, costs of court, pre- and post-judgment interest, and any other penalties pursuant to yada, yada, yada. So essentially, although this particular petition mentions several different aspects of Dak Prescott's professional life and his personal life that have been impacted by this situation, he's only asking for damages of $1 million. And according to reports, that $1 million is actually going to be donated to a nonprofit that supports actual survivors of sexual assault. So I did think that that was an interesting decision to pursue it that way. It sounds like, especially with the prayer for relief that happens at the end of the petition, It sounds like more than anything that they want this to go away. So even though they requested a trial by jury, what's suggested is that they just want the charges to be dropped and to no longer have this impact Dak's reputation, which is definitely understandable. So the reason why I wanted to go over all this is just because what I'd started hearing in the public discourse about this particular topic was very much like a he said, she said, and there definitely is that component to it. However, I wanted to present the facts both in what Victoria Shores is claiming as well as what's actually claimed in the petition presented by Dak and his representation. So yeah, I feel like that's about as much as I can say without getting to the point where I start accusing any particular person of being innocent or guilty. And that's either of them. The same way, we want Dak to be considered innocent until proven guilty. This particular young woman has to be assumed innocent of extortion until proven guilty. And that's tough because both of them being innocent directly conflicts with one another, which is yet another thing that makes this really tough to talk about. And that's why I decided to basically go by the documentation and kind of stay away from my own personal thoughts and feelings, at least for this section of it. But what I will say, like I said a second ago, when it comes to certain aspects of this that might come out and how they might affect the fan base, this is just something that we've seen recently where, just the involvement and the goings on of the Dallas Cowboys seem to impact fans just as much as what happens on the field. So there are some things that might come out here that could impact how people view the front office, how people view the Joneses, maybe even how people view Dak. It's hard to say. But there are several aspects of this that do claim that, hey, my business as a quarterback, my dealings with the Dallas Cowboys have been impacted by this. And I just can't imagine Dak and his representation saying that if they didn't have evidence that that was true. So it should be an interesting situation. More information is going to come out soon. Last time I checked, there hadn't been any progress made in terms of actually bringing this to trial or basically anything beyond the criminal charges being filed and then this lawsuit coming out. So if you've caught up on this, then you are up to speed on everything that's going on. And so I would just encourage everyone, I'm good at finding documents, but I'm not that damn good. I would just encourage everyone who decides to cover this in the future to try to get as the most complete details that we can, because this is a sensitive topic for a lot of reasons. There are a lot of specific details that I think if we leave out, we're not really doing it justice whenever it comes to discussing it thoroughly and responsibly. Flowman says, ultimately, the playoff loss has thrown gas on a forest fire and every topic is hyper divisive. I think you're right on that topic. Somebody on Twitter asked me how I was doing, and the way they phrased the question kind of suggested that they were wondering how I was doing, as a fan, and how I felt about everything that's going on. Because, honestly, other Cowboys fans that I talk to, they sound depressed. And I'm not even just talking about content creators. For the longest time, the other Cowboys fans that I knew were other content creators. I'm gonna take this off the screen for a second, and if y'all need to see any part of it again, let me know. But the other day, I was driving Uber, and I had this guy get in my car, and at the time I was so I have YouTube TV on my phone, and sometimes I'll pull up a show, but I can listen to it while my GPS is up. So I was listening to NFL Live, and they said something that prompted him to ask something about the Cowboys. And we just got into a discussion about it. And it wasn't the first time I had a discussion with a Cowboys fan in my car. And it's just everybody just feels kind of defeated right now. I have yet to talk to a Cowboys fan who sounds excited about anything. And I mean, even the ones who sound defeated sound more defeated than in years past. At least in years past, I heard fans who sounded angry, but there was some sense of passion. Now it's just this very almost passive, just I'm so sick of this team. I'm so sick of this shit. It's they've gone from being angry to just being like done. Like they don't even care anymore. Clement says, the way that the Cowboys front office have been moving for a long time, not just this offseason, good point, will be the main reason why Dak will leave Dallas after this upcoming season. I will say I do think that they're playing with fire by not extending his contract. I think while people are disappointed with the results the team has gotten over the past few years, I do think that there are a lot of teams who would offer Dak Prescott a lot of money to make a difference on their offense. Flowman said everyone is just universally disgusted. Agreed. And obviously situations like this one don't help. Yeah, I thought I was going to have something to add to that. But yeah, situations like this one don't help. And yeah, I'm just like looking at different personal messages, DMs that are coming through. I hope nobody's disappointed that I didn't like say whether or not I think Dak Prescott is innocent or guilty. I feel like most people who have been watching me long enough knew I wasn't going to go there. But yeah, I just did want to point out some of the facts about what exactly came up in his documentation. And also, like I said, I didn't want to go too hard on the radio station because I don't want it to sound like I was necessarily defending Dak or trying to prove his innocence, but I do believe that the way they approached that entire situation was very irresponsible. It lacked ethics. It lacked journalistic integrity, in my opinion. And I do believe that if they truly wanted to cover this story in a fair way, there's so many ways that they could have gone about it than the way that they did. And I just expect better than that from the flagship station of the Dallas Cowboys. But maybe I shouldn't. Maybe them, being so closely connected to the Cowboys doesn't actually give them any sense of responsibility or any sense of duty to actually do right by the team or any of its stars. Maybe at the end of the day, they are just another media outlet looking for ratings, looking for clicks, looking for buzz. And so they were like, hey, this is a really easy way to get it. I don't know. But I know to claim that they tried to approach that fairly, I don't think that's right. And yeah, it's not so much that I felt like Dak didn't deserve it, but just like as a journalist, I just felt like they really approached it wrong. And it really didn't do the fan base any favors. Like, you've got a fan base that already feels dejected, that already feels disgusted. And then you take an opportunity to present the facts of a situation and to responsibly present a very sensitive topic. And instead of doing that, you go the route of, let me get ratings, let me get buzz, let me be controversial. So like you can kind of forget their duty to the team for a minute. Like, your audience is Cowboys fans. And you really didn't do them any favors with how you covered the story. Like, sorry. Clement says he has a power with the no trade clause. Oh, you're still talking about contractual stuff. Phone says, I'm not mad at the radio station because I understand their job is to get people to tune in. Fair enough. The literal motto is turn it on, leave it on. Their ratings across all metrics spiked as a result. You're right. And it's fair that you're not mad at the radio station. I am. But I do think it's more so the journalist side of me and just me knowing that there are so many people who could have covered that story very well and actually educated the fan base. Whereas there are a lot of people who listened to that and thought they were educated. And I mean, if they could have at least just thrown in what I thought was the obligatory, hey, these are allegations. These are not facts. Like, I feel like that's the minimum to expect from journalists in that situation. And they didn't even do that much. And that was really disappointing. Clemens said, let's get Bitches Love Sports and 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, hopefully in mid-April. It helps YouTube algorithm when it comes to content. This is facts. I would love to get to 1,000 subscribers. I would love to have more tuning in. But the fact that I can do this damn near impromptu and so many people have tuned in and are participating in the chat really means the world. So I'm going to try to go live at least one more time this week. And this is also last call for questions on anything that we've discussed today. But there are so many other topics. Like, this time of year is so interesting in the world of sports. Like, this whole issue of sports gambling has gone from, Shohei Ohtani to the MLB to like this particular G League player that's being investigated for gambling. And all that has prompted certain officials in the NCAA to say certain things about how they feel about sports gambling, and their perspective on sports gambling, I think, could have a ripple effect into how revenue sharing and NIL are managed in the NCAA. And I have reasons for thinking that, but if I try to go into it right now, we're going to be on here for another hour. So that's definitely one of the things that I want to discuss later this week. Also, the NCAA tournament, both men's and women's, continue tomorrow. So let's see who we got. On the men's side, hold on, it's not coming up. I could have sworn there were games before Sunday, but it's just showing me Sunday. Let's reload this page and try again. All right. Okay, so tomorrow, which is technically today because it is after 1 a.m. Jesus, I need to get to bed. So we've got Clemson against Arizona, San Diego against UConn, Alabama against UNC. I'm sure a lot of people will be tuning into that in the evening. And Illinois versus Iowa State. And then we've also got on Friday, we've got NC State versus Marquette, Gonzaga versus Purdue, Creighton versus Tennessee, and Duke versus Houston. That is going to be a fun game. I feel like that's going to be a really physical and fun game to watch on Friday. And then on the women's side, today we've got Mississippi State versus Penn State, St. Joseph's versus Villanova, Illinois versus Tulsa, and Toledo versus Washington State. I'm not that excited about any of those. But on Friday, we've got Oregon State versus... Oh, wait. That's a different tournament. Okay, here we go. I was like, what are these schools? Okay. The Women's Sweet 16 starts on Friday. So they've got Oregon State versus Notre Dame, Indiana versus South Carolina, NC State versus Stanford, and Gonzaga versus Texas. I'll definitely be tuned into that. And then on Saturday, that's going to be a fun day. We've got LSU versus UCLA, which UCLA is actually seated higher than LSU. LSU has actually been struggling a little bit against their opponents. So it'll be interesting to see if they really get it together against the higher seed, or if it just further highlights some of the weaknesses that the team has this year. Then we've got Colorado versus Iowa. So we've got Caitlin Clark, and then Colorado is sneaky good. The same way that West Virginia kind of defensively gave Iowa and Caitlin Clark a run for their money, I feel like Colorado could do the same thing, but also take it up a notch. So that should be a close game and a fun game and a very high intensity game as well. And then we've got Baylor versus USC, and then Duke versus UConn. So some really good games this weekend. I'm going to give one last glance at y'all's comments, and then we'll get out of here because I've been here over 90 minutes. Foreman said, I'll say this much. The fact that no national media touched that lawsuit story tells me that no one really takes it seriously. I don't know if that's people don't take it seriously. I really honestly think it has more to do with backlash, and just I think they don't want to deal with the conversation surrounding it. It's such a sensitive topic. It's so easy to say the wrong thing that I think a lot of the media outlets would rather not talk about it at all than to risk saying the wrong thing, than to risk saying something that might come back and bite them, and then they end up being sued for defamation or for libel or slander. You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of people would just rather not touch it. Even when Michael Irvin was dealing with his stuff with Marriott, the main reason it was even addressed was because he was all of a sudden pulled off air. So a couple of the shows that he was on, they talked about the fact that he wasn't on there. but it really wasn't covered in depth by NFL Network, ESPN, nothing. Stephen A. Smith gave like a very vague statement of support of Michael Irvin, but they really didn't go into detail. The main reason people got a lot of detail about that case was because in that situation, Levi McCathern and Michael Irvin did a press conference. They did 2 press conferences, as a matter of fact, and they released footage from the hotel where the incident supposedly happened. But had it not been for that, there would have been a lot about that we didn't know. And in this case, Dak Prescott and Michael Irvin are 2 different people. So there has not been a press conference, which honestly doesn't surprise me. Because I just can't see Dak Prescott wanting to hold a whole press conference about this. As a matter of fact, in the in the demand letter, where they were like, yeah, y'all got in touch on Snapchat. I was like, Dak Prescott on Snapchat? Okay, interesting. So yeah, I'm actually. Flowman said, yeah, but think about how they did Watson. It was pervasive for a year. You make an interesting point. I don't really have a rebuttal for that right now. Maybe the number of accusers? I don't know. Or the fact that it actually took Deshaun Watson off the field might be a big difference. So, like, as of right now, nothing's going to change with Dak's status. The decisions that have been made with the contract are really questionable by a lot of people's standards, but like there's no word that he's been cut, suspended, nothing like that. Now, if something comes out that causes Dak Prescott to be suspended from play, then I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about it. But as of right now, his position hasn't changed, so I really feel like that's probably one of the biggest differences in those stories. So number of accusers and the fact that Deshaun Watson's status actually changed. Like, he was pulled from games, he was suspended, and eventually changed teams. Like, yeah, that's kind of a big deal. Dak, though, no suspension, still with the Cowboys. A little bit different. I see what you're saying, though. I see what you're saying. It is interesting that they've decided to address it this way or to not address it this way, but I can also see several reasons for that decision. Clement says, Paige Beckers and Juju Watkins are players to watch in the Sweet 16 besides Caitlin and Angel. 100% agree. And I'll probably go into more detail on that. Let's see. When was I planning on doing? Because I was trying to decide when I wanted to actually cover the Sweet 16. Because I don't know if going live tomorrow night might be too late. I might do it tomorrow after some of the games end. I might wait until after some of the games end over the weekend. But yeah, at some point we're gonna talk more about those players. This is just one of those things that I wanted to get out the way because I intended to go live and talk about it sooner, and I didn't. So I was like, I don't want this window to completely close. So I was like, let me get this out the way. But yeah, after this, we're going to talk about sports gambling. We're going to talk about the Sweet 16 and all the other fun stuff that is happening in the world of sports right now. So on that note, thank you guys for your questions. Thank you guys for your participation. Thank you for remaining respectful. As far as I know, I haven't really gone to look and see if there's anything I missed on the Twitter side. Hopefully you guys were respectful as well. If not, I'll address that as needed. But yeah, this has been another episode of Bitches Love Sports. Happy to be back. And hopefully I'll be back again later this week. Keep those notifications on so you know. Thanks for joining me. I'm Jazz Monet, and I'm out.